Bunky Knudsen became general manager of Pontiac in 1956 at age 44. And Bunky was a rather interesting fellow. He would stay with Pontiac and eventually be recruited to Ford, where he would later be effectively ousted by Lee Iacocca, who didn't care for his hiring. But in any case, in 1956, Bunky took over Pontiac, and, well, it was a tough job for an individual who was the son of a General Motors president. Pontiac in 1956 was selling about 400,000 cars, but by the time 1958 rolled around, it was down to just 217,000 units. This was largely due to a recession that hit the auto industry particularly hard, and especially the mid-priced makes like Pontiac, Mercury, and Oldsmobile, as well as Buick. But after a few years, Bunky had the division near at least the 400,000 unit barrier again, once the wide-track suspension and styling was introduced for 1959. 1959 was also the first year that Pontiac had its split grille theme, and that would be a trademark that would continue on basically every Pontiac except for a few exceptions until the end of its run. But beyond Bunky Knudsen, there were some other personalities at Pontiac that certainly helped the division, and these were largely rising stars. First among them was Elliot Pete Estes, who would later rise to become GM's president. Estes had been promoted to Pontiac's chief engineer the same year that Bunky had taken over as general manager. That would be 1956. And he would take over as the general manager of Pontiac around 1962, I believe. And Estes' assistant was an individual at the time who was named John DeLorean. DeLorean was only 31 years old when he arrived at Pontiac in 1956. He had previously been a transmission engineer at Packard in the early 50s. Then he was named chief research engineer in 1955 towards the end of the Packard Car Company. And DeLorean, like Estes, as well as Bunky Knudsen before him, certainly made a name for himself running the Pontiac Motor Division and would later ascend not quite to the GM presidency, but to an executive vice presidency level before departing and eventually forming his own DeLorean Motor Company. But back to the story on the 1961 Pontiacs. For 1961, Pontiac was really trying to start capitalizing on this youthful image. And really, it was a combination of this youthful look as well as value and performance orientation that spurred Pontiac sales to levels that they hadn't yet seen. Pontiac would become one of General Motors' most successful divisions in just a few years, and of course, a number of us who watch this channel know that Pontiac churned out some absolutely gorgeous automobiles during this time. More specifically, while Pontiac would sell 239,000 units in 1961, in 1962, its sales would increase to 383,000. In 1963, that would increase to 457,000. And by 1964, Pontiac sales were topping 479,000 units. Quite a feat for what was once kind of a niche division. Now, when the 1961 models were introduced, there were 4 different models overall. There was, at the low end, the Catalina. Then one up from that was the Ventura, which was effectively kind of a baby Bonneville Star Chief, if you will, on the smaller wheelbase. The Catalina and Ventura rode atop a 119-inch wheelbase. And the more exclusive and expensive Pontiac, shall we say, the Star Chief, and the Bonneville rode atop a 123-inch wheelbase. The Catalina came in all different forms, everything from a 2- and 4-door sedan to a hardtop coupe, a Vista hardtop 4-door vehicle, a convertible coupe, and the 6- and 9-passenger Safari wagons. The Ventura, one up from the Catalina, came only in hardtop coupe and 4-door hardtop form. You had to get a hardtop if you wanted a Ventura. Then the Star Chief came in 4-door sedan and the Vista hardtop 4-door. The Bonneville came in the convertible coupe form, a hardtop 4-door, a Safari wagon, and that was it. So there were plenty of models to choose from when you were selecting your 1961 Pontiac. Now, before we go into some more details of the 1961, let's take a look at some of the design proposals because they're kind of funky. At least some of them are funky. Take a look first at this 4-door sedan proposal for the 61 Pontiac. You got this arrowhead spear that runs the length of the vehicle, a bit of a hybrid between the 1961 Buick and maybe a 61 Cadillac out back with that spear up front, or the spear tip out front. That's very, very similar, like I said, to the 61 Buick. I wonder if GM chief designer Bill Mitchell ended up kind of porting that over to the Buick after this design failed for Pontiac. But in addition to that, take a look at the grille and the, I guess there's nothing else to call it, but a turbine engine-like form that's right in the center of the grille. I enjoy that the headlamps have this appearance that they're almost hanging down from the hood, and you have a very finely textured grille. Now, the rear three-quarter of this particular proposal I think is handsome. The four-door sedan here has this awning, if you will, the roof extending over the backlight, which wraps around rather handsomely, similar to the previous 1960 models and the Vista sedans. Now, you also have out back a rather interesting form with the bumper that's got this concave surface as well as the deck lid and the rear panel there. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the taillights and the deck lid if you were to strip the fins off of the 1960 Oldsmobile rear end, but still different. I do like that feature line that's part of the spear up front that kind of has this gentle, graceful diving line all throughout the vehicle, going from the front of the car all the way to the rear, and then actually is beautifully integrated into the bumper. Notice how in the lower portion that feature line just kind of gently goes into the bumper and I think completes the overall form. It's actually a pretty handsome four-door sedan, but for that funky turbine, I don't know what you want to call it, turbine form up front. And then, of course, the bumper up front is also scalloped to enable that turbine form. Now let's take a look at another proposal, yet again a four-door sedan. But this one has a different front end. This has more of a bunky beak front end, similar headlamps to what we just saw. It doesn't have the turbine, but it does say Pontiac in block lettering on the hood, and it has a wind split molding. I don't think this one is quite as elegant as the previous one. And if we look at the rear here, I don't think it's as elegant either. This car doesn't have that, not nearly as pronounced of a spear-like form as the previous one did. And that line that was kind of gently diving on the previous proposal here gets a bit more complicated. Still does form the leading edge of the rear bumper. And the taillights here, as well as the deck lid, are significantly different. And of course, you have the fake air extractor vent that you have to have in General Motors vehicles at this time, just like the 58 Impala had up top, but here Pontiac has it on the rear. I do like the wraparound kind of, let's say, surfacing into the deck lid from the quarter. And that reminds me a little bit of the Pontiac Banshee of the late 80s, that particular concept car that had those wraparound quarters up into the deck lid. That's one of my favorite concept cars of all time. I don't know about you, but I think it's pretty sweet. Now let's take a look at a different proposal, this one for a two-door hardtop. And we can see in the front that we have Pontiac's split grille that was missing on the previous proposals for the four-door sedans, but here it has reappeared, perhaps because of the sales success that Pontiac was having in 1959 and a desire to replicate that styling. But this car, at least to me, doesn't look all that Pontiac-y. It doesn't have that prominent nose. Yes, it has the split grille, but that's about it. I could slap almost any badge on this particular vehicle. It does have a really nice roof line, that so-called bubble top-esque roof line with the large windshield, the curved A-pillar, the large side glass, and then out back you have this tremendously large rear backlight that gives the interior this overall glassy feeling and just a feeling of openness and airiness. Out back you also have some cool styling themes. I love the, I don't know what you want to call it, the quarters that have this arced shape to them that extend past the deck lid that almost looks like jet engine exhaust for taillights. And you have what appears to be this large horizontal surface in between those taillights that emphasizes the width of the overall vehicle. One thing I don't care for in this car, though, is the side surfacing. To me, seems a bit dull. That feature line is rather dull. And it looks like, it's hard to see, but it looks like there's almost a secondary feature line that's below the belt line on this car, and it kind of dives at the door cut and then kicks back upward to form the top of the quarter. I don't know if I like that or not. Again, it's hard to see, but if you look closely, I think you'll be able to discern it. In any case, I think the final designs that Pontiac ended up selecting were actually the best of the bunch if we have to compare them versus the concept clay models that you saw there. The 1961 Pontiacs, when they were introduced, aside from being handsome, were actually smaller than the vehicles they replaced. And this was a, well, let's just say challenging trend that some were concerned about in the auto industry. The cars were 4 inches shorter, 2.5 inches narrower, and also an inch lower than the vehicles that they replaced. The Bonneville and Star Chief wheelbase had even gone down an inch to 123 inches from 124 inches, and the wagons had shed 3 inches in wheelbase. Of particular anxiety to general managers was that the short wheelbase Pontiacs, the Catalina and the Ventura, shared now a wheelbase with Chevrolet, the 119 inches. And you can imagine that both the marketers and general managers weren't particularly happy about giving Chevrolet dealers a talking point. Hey, look, our 1961 Chevrolet has the same overall wheelbase as the one-up Pontiac. That probably would have given me a little bit of anxiety as well. Underneath, there were a number of changes too. Most prominently, that the X-frame that was used by Pontiac since 1958 was now replaced by a box section perimeter frame, and that offered better side impact protection as well as safety, although the X-frame would continue to be used on some vehicles, including the Riviera, all the way up to the 1970 model year. There really was just one engine under hood that you could select from in various states of tune, and that was Pontiac's venerable and also lauded 389 cubic inch V8 that came in 10 different varieties for 1961. There was the standard low compression 2-barrel 215 horsepower version that you got when you ordered a stick shift in your Catalina, Ventura, or Star Chief. The Bonnevilles would come with a standard 4-barrel 235 horsepower 389. And then at the upper end of the spectrum, there was a 348 horsepower tri-power 3.2-barrel 389. And there was also a 333 horsepower trophy engine. And at the upper end of that range, those engines came with 10.75 to 1 compression ratio and some improved exhaust manifolds to give them better breathing. For someone who really wanted even greater performance, there was at least first a dealer-only option, and that was the Super Duty V8. And that engine made 368 horsepower at 5,600 RPM. It cost $1,200. So you got to remember, $1,200 back then is about $10,000 in today's terms. And not many people, of course, ordered a $1,200 engine option when the price of the car, as an example, a two-door sedan, a Catalina two-door sedan for 1961 had a base price of $2,600, just for reference. But that Super Duty engine was available, and you got a lot of special equipment associated with it, including 2-inch intake valves, forged pistons, a Malcolm McKellar solid lifter cam that was named after Malcolm McKellar, Pontiac's chief engineer. You may have learned about that in a previous segment on the overhead cam 389 and 421 V8s that McKellar and his team developed. If you haven't seen that, check my YouTube channel. And one above that was actually the Super Duty 421 cubic inch V8. That 421 was offered in 1961 for the first time. It would continue on through 1966. In 1967, it would become the 428. But that Super Duty 421 with two 4-barrel carburetors made 373 horsepower. It had an 11-to-1 compression ratio, an aluminum intake manifold, mechanical lifters. That was really the hot engine for Pontiacs, but only about a dozen of those engines were allegedly built. Regardless, it appears that General Motors leadership was significantly pleased with the job that Bunky and team had done, and as a result, he was rewarded with a promotion to lead Chevrolet in November of 1961, and he left Pontiac in the capable hands of Pete Estes, who would then go on to continue, let's say, the Pontiac's significant level of success, and then John DeLorean would replace Pete Estes and do the same. Now let's talk a little bit about what one needs to look out for if you're going to pursue a 1961 Pontiac? Well, first of all, the cars in general are pretty durable, and you have to, of course, check for rust. I would say in general, behind the wheels, whether that's the front wheels or the back wheels, the front fenders on these are prone to rust. Check around the rear window for rust, at the bottom of it in particular. And I will say this, the 389 cubic inch engine, I'm sure that few of us are looking for a 421 Super Duty, but the 421 as well, are very good and durable engines. Not really too much to note there. However, the automatic transmissions on select Pontiacs, the short wheelbase Pontiacs, the Catalinas and the Venturas, are terrible for 1961 because the automatic transmission that was selected was an automatic transmission developed by Oldsmobile, and that is the Roto-Hydromatic. And it's just awful. It shifts very funky, and it's also not very durable, and it's pretty gosh darn hard to find somebody who rebuilds them nowadays. The 4-speed Hydromatics that were found in the larger Pontiacs, the Star Chief and the Bonneville, those are bulletproof. You don't have to worry about those. But beware if you buy a Catalina or a Ventura, if it comes with the automatic transmission and not a manual, you may have to be careful. Make sure it's shifting right and not making any funny buzzing noises. And hopefully the previous owner had it rebuilt somewhere along the way, because those transmissions just did not last very long. It was an unfortunate design, and it's unfortunate that General Motors forced Pontiac to take a transmission it probably didn't want to. But I guess Oldsmobile was also trying to thin the production costs out over larger volume. In any event, that Roto-Hydromatic would be sunset after the 1964 model year, so you don't have to worry anymore about it after that point. And then the Pontiac automatic transmissions are kind of the standard GM autos of that time that are very, very durable and reliable. In any case, thanks for watching this special on what I think is kind of the start of Pontiac's awesome youthful era, these 1961 Pontiacs. If you like this, be sure to drop a comment in the comments section. Thanks again for watching.